Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Meaningful Communication Show. I am your co-host, Chad Eves, and today we'd like to wish everybody a happy last day of Hanukkah, happy holiday season, and a Merry Christmas season as we come up in just like another week and a bit for the Christmas day itself. And as we kick off this episode, I'm going to hand this over to my partner in crime, Michael Gansel, to introduce our guest today.
And of course, the phone rings just as we're in the middle of the podcast. What can you do? Anyway, hello, everyone. I'm Mike Gansel. And my daughter who's calling is actually very persistent. She's going to call again. Call my wife, will you please? Anyway, welcome, everybody. And thanks for the holiday greetings. I do have the pleasure of introducing Josh Saterman of Saterman Connect. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Josh, and then we'll get right into the podcast. So Josh is the CEO and co-founder of Saterman Connect and co-author of the book Arrive, Drive, and Thrive. Saterman Connect partners with organizations, leaders, and high potential talent through coaching, consulting, and the development of custom learning solutions to foster, enhance, and embed inclusive leadership and diversity and inclusion strategies with their organizations. Now, before Josh founded this firm, he held several major positions at Macy's, which I didn't know, which I'm really very interested in hearing about. He was head of diversity and inclusion for culture and engagement at Macy's and was responsible for running their employee resources group with over 50 individual chapters and 7,500 plus members. And he also serves as a senior chair on the board of directors for the Hetrick Martin Institute, one of the largest and oldest LGBTQ and youth organizations in the world. So welcome, Josh. It's a really pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Chad and Mike. Thank you for having us.
Well, awesome. Well, we're going to kick off this episode with an icebreaker section. And so what I'm going to do, Josh, is I'm going to ask you to select a number between 1 to 5, and that's going to determine which question you get.
3.
Okay. For 1 week, you have to eat the same meal 3 times a day. What meal would you choose?
Pepperoni and mushroom pizza.
Wow. Not even hesitation. Okay. From where?
Probably from VNT. It's this local Italian restaurant on the corner of 111th and Amsterdam here in New York City. I highly recommend VNT, but I will say honorable mention only because it's not close enough to deliver is Ruby Rosa on Mulberry Street down in Soho. If I had my brothers, I would merge Ruby Rosa and VNT so I can have the best of both worlds.
Well, this could very easily devolve into a pizza war, New York versus Chicago. But we'll move past this. And
You move so fast. I know V&T, and I was actually up there just the other day. It's right across the street from the Church of Saint Divine. You know, the big church, right? Yeah. And V&T has been around forever. I mean, it served the students of Columbia University for like decades. Yeah. Don't know about Ruby, the one you mentioned.
Ruby Rosa. It's a New York City Soho institution. So
all right, I'm going to check that out. Terrific. I love pepperoni pizza. I really do.
And if you're ever in Chicago, I'm a Lou Malnati's guy. The Chicago classic, which is cheese and sausage, and add the mushrooms.
I get it. No, I totally understand that. So that's fair.
It's 1 o'clock here in New York. It's 12 o'clock, so it must be lunchtime. So maybe we'll just go ahead. No, I'm kidding. We have to do the podcast.
So I'm gonna hand off to Michael here for a question, but I'm gonna go for the low hanging fruit here, Josh. What's the meaning behind the elephant in your logo?
The elephant's actually very significant for us. I was very close to my grandfather, who lived to an amazing age of 94, and always wanted to live to 100. So unfortunately, that one of his many goals was not achieved. But my grandfather was a big fan of elephants for their symbolism around family. And we talk about family, I talk about chosen family, not just biological family, the people that you choose to surround yourself with. One of Saterman Connect's values is Ubuntu. It's one of our 6 values. And Ubuntu stands for we are who we are because of those around us. And elephants live that. They live that sense of community, togetherness, one herd, one team, that memory of what was and how to craft what will be. And so my grandfather also used to say, the stick has two sides. It's a way of reminding us that things are not binary, that there are things that serve us and hold us back. And in that journey, you create meaningfulness, you create impact. So the elephant trunk up, because of tradition, trunk up is good luck. So that elephant is holding that stick to remind us that most of life is not binary, but rather how do things serve us and how do things hold us back?
Really interesting.
So
Okay.
actually, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because I had the same thoughts. And so, actually, so now, Josh, forgive me, is it Saterman or Saterman?
Well, it depends on which part of the country or world you're from, but we typically go hard A, so we go Saterman.
Okay.
There is a brief story there, so I will interrupt just to say, when my husband and I got married, I was a Bergman and he was a Sater, and we have a wonderful daughter named Maya, and we thought that it would be another adventure, another chapter to that concept of marriage and oneness, to merge our last names. So we took the Bergman and we took the Sater and we became Saterman.
Ah, okay. That's interesting to know. So I'm going to ask you a question then, because Saterman Connect basically is a DEI firm. And I would basically ask you, what is DEI?
So you are right, and I'll do a yes and. We're a big fan of yes and. I would say DEI and B strategies, initiatives, programs are certainly part of our journey. Our higher calling, Mike, is really about inclusive leadership. And I share that because I don't want people to get caught up in the rhetoric or the news of what is DEI and B just yet. I want to elevate the conversation to be about inclusion and leadership, and that the best leaders are inclusive because they then get the most out of their people. So our firm specializes in understanding that crux between engagement and fulfillment. Engagement meaning how does an employee feel about their company, and fulfillment meaning how does that employer fill that employee's bucket. We spend a lot of our time in our workday, and those that are truly offering full innovation, full creative license, full experience, learned and lived, are those that want to contribute to their organizations at the highest level.
Now, you were working at Macy's. So tell us a little bit about that role and how you got involved in leadership and engagement fulfillment in the first place.
So I started off my journey in retail actually when I was about 16. I always have been drawn to this crux between customer want and service, being in that servant leadership, service leadership model. And so I always was drawn to retail. So I have a business degree. I've always loved math. So I went into the buying offices at a little company called Riches. For any of you who are located in the South, it was like a Stearns or A&S or Robinson May or Famous Bar or any of those Burdines, any of those regional department stores that were very much part of American department store landscape in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and in some cases prior to. So I was at Riches in Atlanta, which was part of Macy's Inc., but I actually feel like I've worked at 5 or 6 different versions of Macy's through my career. And started off in the buying office, started off in the ranks of buying. I was very fortunate to have a senior executive. Her name is Becky Dannenfelser. I honor her as much as possible because she lived life to the fullest and unfortunately lost her battle to breast cancer. But at 23, she invested in me and she made me feel seen and heard. She became an executive coach after her Macy's career and supported lots of different kinds of industries with thinking about their leadership, how they showed up to support that symbiotic relationship between people and business. So in honor of her executive coaching stayed with me throughout my Macy's journey. And I was always reminded that people solve for business, and business as it gets solved is driven by people. So I would start there. I would just say there was some privilege and honor in working at Macy's. They have a very extensive development program. They really, at the time when I was there, I don't know how it's changed since I've left several years ago. But throughout my journey, they were invested in your development. So essentially, I got to go through academies and workshops and leadership and coaching experiences and all sorts of things. And throughout that journey, again, as my values shifted, as my career trajectory shifted, as I took on more senior executive roles, again, I was reminded of this power of people.
So
when we launched Saterman Connect, oh, sorry, you go. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I was going to say, so as we launched Saterman Connect, our mission statement is to unlock and amplify the power of people to drive impact and business results.
So
that's there.
I have a people-related question for you then.
Yeah.
A people/pandemic-related question.
Yeah.
So in the second part of the pandemic, there was a great resignation.
Yeah.
And, two of the primary factors that were attributed to that were people feeling like their contributions mattered and that they belonged somewhere. What is your perspective on that from what you do, and what can leaders do to avoid a repeat of that phenomenon? Or is it avoidable? Or is it just a cycle that happens?
I think talent acquisition, talent retention, talent attrition, I think is all cyclical. I don't think it's bad to always have people with experience leave or people with experience come from different perspectives. I think the Great Migration or the Great Resignation or the war on talent, there's so many different words to describe this. I think essentially what it's about is change leadership, that the world is changing fairly quickly. There's a statistic that I believe it was either Fortune or Forbes, I can't remember the source, but I want to honor that source. But essentially it was prior to pandemic, not driven by pandemic, but just driven by a cycle of business. On average, companies were facing about 2 massive changes a year. That number post-pandemic and going to 2024 is up to about 10. That means business conditions have changed, regional campuses have shifted, the needs of their actual workforce, engineering to sales, sales to engineering have changed. So I think to answer your question around, what does movement look like in organizations? I think part of it is assessing the technical skills of what organizations need. I think part of it is the critical skills of what are the behaviors and leadership skills that everyone in an organization, not just C-suite, so leadership is not reserved for the C-suite, bring to an organization. And somewhat of what we found in COVID was, how do values step in there? What is happening for individuals, families, loved ones that are taking center stage and priority? And at the beginning stages of COVID, it was scary. We didn't really know what we were fully dealing with. Towards the end, as we got more comfortable moving around, we realized that connection to loved ones or purpose or something beyond the commute was driving a lot of individuals. Again, going back to that concept of what fulfills me and in what ways am I engaged in my organization.
So funny, I've written down a few questions about DEI.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, I don't want to pigeonhole Saterman Connect in the DEI, because what I hear is that you're way beyond that. But if you would, what is your definition of DEI, and what are the challenges of DEI in today's workforce, and particularly with leadership and development?
Well, I'll start actually with the second. I'll go to the first. I want to myth bust for this audience. I don't like what's happening in the world of politics around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the reason why I don't like it is because it's starting to become sound bites. And on all spectrums, I'm not in the space of politics, but on all spectrums, once politics gets involved with people, we tend to conflate what's happening. Diversity is a fact. You can have 2 white, cisgender, means gender born of the sex you were born with stays as, right? Cisgender, white men, middle age. The three of us fit into that bucket, by the way. And we are diverse. We
Yes.
have elements of our diversity that are different. So let's start with myth busting that diversity is not about splitting people apart. It's actually the opposite, which is because we are all unique, because we are all different, that is actually what unites us. That is actually what makes us special. Equity is access. It's how do we provide access and make sure that we can all play the game. If we show up to play baseball, but we tell a few people to bring a football, we're not playing the same game. So how do we create access? Inclusion is choice. It's a choice to say good morning when you walk into an office or open up that Teams or Zoom and greet your team. It is a choice to say, hey, before we get started with our day, I want to recognize the world is heavy. If any of you are impacted by that heaviness, we're thinking of you. We're acknowledging that that might be on your mind. So inclusion is a choice. Those are inputs that define the word belonging. Those are inputs that allow belonging, which is a sense of feeling connected, to be present. If you can't celebrate who you are and bring your full self into a space that you exist in, if you can't have access to participate and play the game like everybody else is playing, it's not about winning a trophy. It's about active participation. If you can't feel like your voice matters and that you can share without being ridiculed or put down, then you can't feel like you belong.
So then what is your perspective of business and corporations today?
I want businesses to understand that every part of the way that we are raised, where we come from, who we are, is a closer connection to the workforce, the workplace, and the marketplace. The workplace is your employees, the workplace is your environment, and the marketplace is the community, the customers, the patients, the clients that you serve. And that's DEIB. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is about building awareness, creating connections, opening minds, and embracing diversity. And the reason for it is it is proven in the data. We can go through statistics. We don't have enough time in our podcast today, but we can go through statistics that demonstrates that when employees show up and they bring all that energy, all that sophistication, all of that openness, that yes and, that organizations thrive. They drive more results, they have higher profits, they retain best talent. And for all of those reasons, DEI&B is healthy for businesses.
And so what is the role of human resources in corporations? And how does DEI&B relate to human resources? Has human resources failed us? Has human resources done a good job for us? What is that role in the business world these days?
So human resources, for those that are on the podcast listening and want to learn more about human resources, there's a lot of different parts to human resources. It's no different than some of the other functions like in finance. In finance, you have accounting, you have controllers, you have all sorts of different managers around accounts payable and receivable, right? As an analogy. I would say the same thing for human resources. Human resources is a wide function. There's operations, there's talent management, there's talent acquisition, there's human resource business partners, HRBPs. DEI&B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, is not HR's to own. It is HR's to contribute to. DEI&B is the organization's to own. From CEO to first day employee on the job or first day employee in working career, to anyone that supports, understands, connects to that organization's mission, vision, and values. It is not a separate competency. So we can't say, it's a great question, Mike, and so many people connect those two. HR is DEIB, DEIB is HR. Most of our work is done at the CEO, CFO, Chief Information Officer, and CHRO levels.
So that leads me to ask you this question: how are they doing? How are the C-suite leaders in major corporations dealing with the things, that the inputs that you're talking about? How are they dealing with it, and what are their challenges?
So what we're talking about a lot right now is some of the whys and the whats. I think what you're asking is how. How do CEOs apply this work? Is that correct?
You can answer that question any way you like. It's fine.
Well,
Okay.
I think another aspect that also might be is, when it comes to business, outcome rules are, if you're not profitable, if you're not having the revenue come in, the other stuff has problems surviving,
Sure.
and that's one of the things I think that's very interesting. And because I work with executives and under the umbrella of executive coaching and advisory services, is a lot of times people will punt that over to HR. It's like, oh no, I'm focused on this widget. I'm only going to do this, and I'm not going to worry about that. Versus one of the things that what I see organizations be successful is when people have that sense of, this is wrong, we're not tolerating this, or this is good, we're going to promote this, versus having to make it a process.
Yeah.
To where like it's got to go through some rigmarole or whatever, versus like, okay, that's wrong, that's not tolerable, you're going to have consequences, or that's something good, let's celebrate that, not let's review it, let's pay it through all these different checks, checklists and stuff like that. Is that a thing? Just will people like, and maybe this is what Michael's asking, is do they get better? Is it an issue of where they get more comfortable and better with calling out what needs to be changed and celebrating what needs to be recognized, or are they still? Is there a sense of hesitation on making those decisions or following through on that kind of stuff?
That is an aspect of it. What we talk about in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is the idea of how do you think, act, and operate. So culture is everyone's to own in an organization. And at the same time, I would say, like most hierarchies, it starts at the top. So if a CEO is accepting bad behavior, define it as you want, treating a customer disrespectfully, as equal as treating an employee disrespectfully. I would go on the other side. I like to lean on where is there possibility, right? Because I want there to be more light than dark. And so I would say CEOs that are transparent about what's happening in the business. That's DEIB. When you have a town hall or you have a coffee chat and you educate whatever levels you're speaking to, doesn't matter if it's your C-suite, doesn't matter if it's skip levels, levels within the organization. And when you lead with that transparency, not that access is all information, there's room to share truth and have discretion. So again, there's no silver lever, there's no magic button that says this is everything or nothing. Again, that's why the stick has two sides. Going back to the question of the branch, is employees want to know. They want to know, how is the company performing? And there are some things that are confidential because of rules and because of stipulations and compliance. But sharing that, hey, I can't share this particular information yet because there are rules, there's laws, there's compliance, there's SEC. Fill in the blank on what that is. I think today's, and I'll say generation, I don't mean Gen Z or millennial. I mean, if you think about access, go back to that word equity, right? Instagram, social media moments, access is everywhere. So those CEOs that understand the power of honesty and transparency, the power of saying, I don't know yet. You're asking this question. It's a great question. I'm not sure yet. Our C-suite is still debating this and having discussion on it. Hey, and if you have inputs, if you have ideas, we want to hear them.
So the question
that are winning.
For my question to come back is, how are the C-suite leadership people dealing? How are they doing? Would you say on a scale of 1 to 10 that they're 10, they're doing fabulous? On a scale of 1 to 10, on 1, they're doing terrible. Where do you see today leadership is happening in those corporations?
It's a very fair question. It's also a little hard for me to answer because, again, if I read the news, I hear one thing. We have a large chunk of clients. I mean, we don't have 5 clients. We don't have 5 million clients. We have somewhere in the middle. So what I would advocate for is, in our experience, the companies that we have accomplished great metrics with. Let me define what that means. Stronger engagement surveys, stronger retention of top talent. CEO suite, CEO and C-suite that are strategizing more often and talking to each other more powerfully. Those organizations are thriving. They are doing great business, and they have been clients of ours for years. Those clients that are apprehensive, unsure, unwilling to take that risk, are leading with some rhetoric, are being held back. They're not reaching full potential based on the talent of their organization, the power of their people. That is a specific thing to our experience. Because I don't feel comfortable, Mike, if I say this is how the world, I don't have access to that. But what I do have access to is that those companies that understand the power of this work and the widest spectrum of how this work drives both business and people success are doing really well.
So, Josh, what's your perspective on organizations? Because there's a lot of them out there and a lot of them in the news right now where they espouse doing one thing, but then if you look under the hood, they've got some practices that are not supportive of that. Whether it's, using slave labor somewhere or whatever else it might be. And is that something you look to qualify for when you're considering working with someone? Is it that consistency, that transparency, or is that something organizations have been like, we need help in fixing this problem and being more in alignment, or versus, oh, help us do this so we look good, even though don't pay attention to that evil we're doing over there?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm also a truth teller. So I'll lead with some transparency here. There are some organizations that are zero tolerance for us. So if anyone on this call is very proud NRA member, I'm not compromising your right to guns, but I will go on record and say we will not do business with organizations that are firearms sales organizations. We are very much in favor of gun rights regulations for all the reasons that we can talk about. So I'm happy to have that healthy debate on guns. So that is for our company, part of our values, our vulnerability, courage, fulfillment, Ubuntu, right, is that line in the sand. I can't speak to all companies. However, what your question is also is how do we approach clients or prospects and have our own open-mindedness? And what that refers to is Carol Dweck's term of growth mindset. I'm not interested in perfection. We are humans. We are built to make mistakes. So mistakes are different than zero tolerance. If organizations enter in with growth mindset and they're willing to listen and engage in conversation, we are always there for that kind of organization because we're not expecting perfection. We're expecting to get a little dirty and to get into the work. It's no different than a sales plan. It's no different than a financial gross margin formula. We have to do the work. And if we're not a little uncomfortable, we're not growing. So that doesn't scare me, right? Nothing scares me. But what would give us some pause is if the organization's mission and vision do not align with embracing people, embracing the power of people.
So, it's
answer your question, Chad?
What's that?
Does that answer your question?
It does, it does to a certain way. I guess one of the things is, people that use the DEI as, kind of the window dressing when they're doing something else that isn't, in alignment with that. Whether it's, like I was, using an example, using slave labor or, whatever types of sourcing, they're doing for products like electric vehicles. A lot of times companies like to get up on their podiums about that, but then you dig into the supply chain and children are digging up cobalt with their bare hands in Africa, and it's like, is it more I guess one of the things that always kind of catches my eye is when a company says, oh, we're going to do this or that, but then like Apple, and I use Apple products. But then you got the whole Foxconn factory, situation in China. You
Yeah.
know, where you got the workforce, you know, and suicide issues.
I think
So that's one of the things I always think that's interesting is when an organization's like, oh yeah, we're going to do this and we support this or that, but then they're not always consistent on that, or something that could be construed as that.
Yeah.
Well, I think Josh answered that question. I think, basically his Saterman Connect has its value system. They're people. They have their own values. So they make their own choices. I don't think Josh could actually answer the question as you're posing it, but I'm sure what I hear is that they will make the choice to work with whomever the people that share some of their common values.
Well, and again, I'll give the example. I won't share company names for protecting them and their interests, of course. But I would share, we just did an exercise with a group of 9 white men in South Carolina that are very rural, that are quote unquote in the farming, manufacturing, very quintessential, you would call it, sort of not city, not big company, right? Smaller organization, under 500 people. They cared. They reached out. They wanted to think about the ways that they could be more inclusive and what that means for their organization. That's meaningful. That's meaningful. So I'm not going to judge people. We as a company don't judge people and say no for them. Rather, what we say to clients and prospects is we want to meet you in your map of the world. We want to understand your objectives. Why is this work meaningful to you? What is your bandwidth for it? How have you worked on this prior? What are ways we meet your employee base or the workforce, the environment you serve in, the workplace, and the marketplace that you serve? How can we understand those needs more deeply so we can understand how to support you with strategies, initiatives, and programs? So again, there's no silver lever. It's not a year strategy, right? Mm-hmm. It's really understanding how this competency of equity, inclusion, and belonging and the understanding of diversity impacts all aspects of your business.
And ultimately what I hear is that your goal, the ultimate goal, is to help companies develop talent.
Yes.
That basically drive that organization forward, either forward or backwards. But yes, basically it comes down to talent. So we're hitting a little bit longer than we normally do. So I'm going to ask you one last question. And by the way, I want to thank you so much for your transparency. And really, this information is incredible. I really appreciate it. What do you see the future? And so instead of asking you, I might have asked you, what is the future of DEI and B? I'm not going to ask you that. I'll ask you, what is the future of talent? What do you see as the future of talent?
There are 3, for the audience, this was not a plugged question. So this is a brilliant question. And I just answered this question actually for another podcast, another like this experience. There are 3 areas I think in the next 1 to 3 years will be quite prevalent for organizations. The first is change leadership. I already mentioned that.
Josh, can you start over because you dropped out a little bit when you started talking? I don't want the audience to miss what you were saying.
Sure. So there are 3 areas over the next 1 to 3 years that I see as being dominant workplace trends to think about in this space. One is change leadership, which I mentioned previously. This concept of something is always ending, something is always in a neutral zone, and something is beginning. It's a form of the Bridges model, William Bridges, who invented this concept of endings, neutral zones, and new beginnings. And the concept here is to get people more comfortable with living in the unknown. Leaders are making decisions today with way less information and certainty than they ever have. So change leadership is about understanding transition and not necessarily change. Change is ever present. 2, cultural humility. The power to admit as an executive, as a leader, that you don't know what you don't know. And how do you ask powerful questions to educate? So that's why our pillars to DEI and B are building awareness, creating connections, opening minds, and embracing diversity. We are still a global economy. So you don't know far more than you know. If you operate there with humility, better leadership. 3, emotional intelligence. I hear more from leaders, tell me more about empathy. Empathy is feeling or being in somebody's shoes. There are people that are high empath. They really feel the emotionalism of somebody else's experience. What best organizations and leaders offer is an understanding, an acknowledgement of that people lead full lives. You could have a parent with Alzheimer's. You could have a child with autism. You could be suffering from your own mental health and working through it. It doesn't make you deficient, it makes you human. So leading with cultural humility, understanding that change is ever present, and understanding the power of emotional intelligence to be more connected to your workforce are three massive trends I see that the best companies, not the Apples and the Microsofts and the Googles, like that's a different element, but the majority of Americans work for other organizations that are smaller, that are more intimate. And in those environments, those three criteria are going to be quintessential to a healthy workforce.
Oh, awesome. Josh, I think this is obviously such a timely topic, and it's all around us. It's something that's not going away anytime soon. I think you provide a lot of interesting insight for our audience on this. If people want to follow up with you and get in contact with you or with your company, what's some good ways for them to do that? And we will include that information in the show notes as well.
You can absolutely reach out to us at satermanconnect.com. We have a robust marketplace. So we call our website a marketplace, so you can interact with us and explore. You can reach out to any of our leaders. We're on Instagram and LinkedIn, and hello@satermanconnect.com is our email. And we would be happy to talk to you and acknowledge where you're at in your leadership journeys. So thank you to you, Chad and Mike, and to your audience for listening.
Mike, any closing comments?
Well, just a thank you, Josh. It's really a pleasure. It really was very informative, and I think our audience will find this very interesting. And I want to thank you again. Chad?
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Josh. Michael, as always, great to do the show with you. Everyone else, have a safe and happy holiday season with your families, chosen or born with, whoever they might be, and get ready for another great new year, because we set the plate on how it's going to be, and let's get out there and have a great new year together. Thank you, everybody. And this is the last episode of the year, incidentally. So there won't be a new show until January. But there's plenty of shows to go to the YouTube channel and catch up on. So if you just joined us, there's some previous episodes that you can go and join. And Michael, you look like you want to say something.
And I'd like everybody to subscribe. If you go to our YouTube channel, the Meaningful Communication Show podcast, and you like what you see, please subscribe. That's it. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody take care. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.